It is good to be with y'all today, and I do want to say welcome again. If you're one of our guests, we especially want to say welcome to Round Prairie. Hope that you're blessed to be a part of the services today. You know, one of the things that churches get labeled doing a lot is that we talk about money a lot, and the reality is there are some churches that do spend an inordinate amount talking about money. We do try to avoid that here at Round Prairie because we don't want every service to be about give me your money, give me your money. That's not our motive here. But the Bible does teach a lot about how we are supposed to handle our personal finances, and so we do feel like we need to understand what the Scripture says, and so you will find us occasionally going back to the Scriptures and having a series strictly on financial management. And that's kind of where we are today. And this is next to the last sermon in this series. We're talking about our finances. It's called Own the Money. If you were here for the first few weeks, we talked about a few different items. What we talked about the first week was we really talked about this idea of contentment and how when we are chasing money, what we're oftentimes really chasing is a place of contentment. We believe that if we can just earn enough money, buy enough stuff, that would lead to us being truly satisfied and happy in our lives. And what we found is that that's contrary to what God says about how you find contentment. That contentment's not about your external circumstances, but about your internal posture. And this could really be part 2 of that sermon that we're going to be talking about today. But the second week we talked about the idea of stewardship and how there's nothing that we have that truly belongs to us. And if you don't believe that, it's like that old adage, when's the last time you saw a hearse pulling a U-Haul? We brought nothing into this world and we can take nothing out. We are temporary tenants at best, and that God is the true owner of all things. And so we are merely stewards of what God has entrusted to us. And so the question is not, are we a steward? It's what kind of steward are we being? And then last week, we talked a little more practical about some financial management ideas, and we talked about everything from spending to debt, and we talked about living with margin in our budget, and those are all biblical principles. But today, I couldn't get out of this series without really preaching this particular passage that Jesus teaches on finance, and that's talking about financial perspective. Perspective matters in every area of life, but it matters greatly in your finances, and you're going to see why here in just a minute. How many of y'all, when the solar eclipse happened back in April, went outside and looked up at the sun like everybody else pretty much? Did y'all all do that? Now, some of y'all don't see as well because you didn't use the glasses, right? Right? Everybody there was told, oh, it's going to blind you. I'm going to tell you something. Teachers, I want to clue you in on your male students right now. If you want them to stop looking directly at the sun, stop telling them to not look directly into the sun, okay? Because I believe I was like a lot of guys. I wanted to see what it looked like with the naked eye just for a second, right? And you look up and what happens? It does kind of get uncomfortable. But when you looked at the sun, when the solar eclipse happened, you had your little glasses. My family, we went out and we actually were out in the backyard and we actually jumped on the trampoline, not jumped, but like laid back on the trampoline and looked up. I don't want y'all to think we're just jumping around with our glasses on. We're not idiots. But anyway, so we jumped up to the trampoline and laid down, and we looked up at the eclipse. Now, what I noticed about the eclipse was a couple of things. One is when it looked vastly different with the naked eye versus with those little glasses. But then we also had some binoculars, and we used those over our little glasses, and then it looked vastly different with that view. I remember I heard about these, they called them solar flares, but I've since learned that they're called prominences. They're not called flares for you technical gurus out there. They were solar prominences. When the ball of the sun, you can see the little gas bubbles coming off of it, going for hundreds of miles off the surface. Those were called prominences. But what I noticed is you couldn't see those unless you had your glasses, and then really you couldn't see them well unless you had the binoculars. And what I'm getting at is this. We were looking at the same exact moment in time, but depending on how your perspective was it with the naked eye, with the little glasses, or the binoculars, it changed your whole experience of that moment. Your perspective matters when you experience life. Have you ever noticed how two people can walk through the same thing but experience it totally different? What the difference is oftentimes nothing to do with the outside circumstances. Those are the same. It's their perspective of what they're going through. If you grew up dirt poor and you have enough groceries to last the week, you might think we are living high on the hog. But if you grew up wealthy, you don't even think about the groceries that you have for the week because that's never been a thought in your mind that you might not have enough. Your perspective could change. You could have the exact same amount of groceries in the pantry, but have two totally different takes on where you are in life. Well, when it comes to your finances, your perspective matters if you're going to have joy in this life and feel contentment in that area. It's your internal perspective that matters. Well, when you look at the Bible, and you look specifically at the Sermon on the Mount, what I love about this sermon in Matthew chapter 6 we're going to be reading is Jesus is teaching people on the hillside. And one of the things you'll start seeing in this sermon pretty quickly is that Jesus isn't just concerned with the what, he is concerned with the how of our lives. The religious landscape leading up to the time that Jesus preaches this sermon was kind of like this. Rules, rules, and more rules. And the idea was the rules of the Old Testament law, you just had to do them. Like it, love it, hate it, you just do it. Act like you like it, check it off, and God is somehow pleased with that. Well, what Jesus does in the Sermon on the Mount is he teaches us that that is religion, but that is not the relationship that God desires with his people. That it's not just about what you do. God genuinely cares the heart behind it. As a parent, how many of y'all are kind of the same way, right? I mean, there are certain things you want your kids just to do, amen? Like, I don't really care if your heart is into picking up your socks, just get them up off the floor, right? I mean, you're with me, right? But when it comes to deeper things, I don't want you to just do it because I said it. I want you to do it because it's the person you're becoming. I want you to be kind to people because it's truly what your heart is like. I want you to not steal from people because you have a heart that understands that God has created you for more than that. Yeah, I care about the how. Well, Jesus cares about the how. And when it comes to our finances, it's not just enough to check off the list of what God says to do, but how we do things financially matters. Well, Jesus has been teaching in these last few verses preceding where we're going to be reading in chapter 6 about prayer. And he talks about prayer, and he says, and when you pray, don't be like the hypocrites. Well, the hypocrites, what would they do? Well, they wouldn't just go pray. They would pray, and they'd make a spectacle of it. And they would want to make sure that they prayed in such a way that everybody saw what they were praying about so that people would look at them and say, oh, how holy they must be, right? Let's just be honest. We hear prayers like that sometimes, right? I mean, how many of us, I'm not trying to, I probably ought to be careful here. I don't think that just because you use certain language that you're going for this, but if we're not careful, even our prayers today could be about showboating more than having a conversation with the Father. We use language that we would never use. We act so pious and holy, but our heart is really inwardly dirty and corrupt. And so Jesus says, don't pray so that other people see you praying. Pray like it doesn't matter what other people think. Go into the inner room of your house. Pray privately. It's not about a show. He says, when you fast, don't look gloomy like the hypocrites. He says, for they disfigure their faces so that people can see that they're fasting. He says, don't fast like that. If you're going to fast, don't make it a show. He says, if you're going to give to the needy, make sure that you don't do it in such a way that everybody pats you on the back. Give in such a way that people don't even know you gave, because you're doing it for the Lord, not for the praise of man. And so he transitions from that right into this passage about perspective on our finances and handling this life that he's given us in regard to what we're going to do with it financially. And in verse 19, in chapter 6, he says this, do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. The eye is the lamp of the body, so if your eye is healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light in you is darkness, how great is the darkness? No one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. We're going to stop there. He goes on to talk about being anxious and worrying about your finances. This whole section is about how you perceive money, how you're going to interact with treasures on this earth, how you're going to respond to the pull of culture to grab more and more and more. He's going to give instruction on this. It's not telling you what amount is enough. That's not what he's getting at here. He's talking about how you and I are going to interact with culture when it comes to our money. And he says this, lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven. Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on the earth. Now, what is Jesus teaching here? Jesus, at the most basic level, is saying everyone has a choice to make today. Every single one of us in this room have a choice to make when it comes to how we're going to live our lives. Are you going to live your life laying up treasures in heaven, or are you going to live your life laying up treasures on earth? And we're not going to talk about the fact that that is a very black or white choice later on. We're going to see that. But for now, I just want to tell you, everyone in this room has a choice to make how you're going to interact with money and things in the world in which you live. You are going to either live your life building up treasures on this earth, or you're going to live your life building up treasures in heaven. And Jesus says, I'm commanding you, do not live your life as my man or my woman laying up those treasures here, because here they're going to all decay anyway. It's going to all go away anyway. At best, it might last another generation, but your money and all the stuff you're putting up, he goes, man, people can break in, they can steal it, the stock market can crash. I tell you what, if you leave it in the attic, man, a moth can get into it and just eat up your most prized possessions. He says, don't spend your life laying up treasure that will not last. Everybody in here has a choice to make. Now the question is, what is Jesus getting at when he says, don't lay up for yourselves treasure on earth? Well, here's what he's not getting at. Some people have used these verses and others to say that then that means that Christians, and a lot of times preachers specifically, should never have wealth. That Christians should never have any kind of possessions in this world. And there are sects and there are divisions of Christianity out there, if you'd call that do believe this idea that Christians are supposed to just walk around debased and poor and wretched in this world. And they get this from this passage saying, don't lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven. You can't have anything. Well, the problem is that doesn't square with other things we see in Scripture. Last week we saw, right, that the fool spends all that he has. But the prudent man has margin. He has oil for the lamps. We know that from God's word that it's okay to have more than you need in the moment. We know that it's okay from Proverbs and the wisdom we see there to have enough that helps you later on in life. I don't think Jesus is talking about you don't have a 401k here. I really don't think that's what he's saying. I don't think Jesus is getting at that. I don't think Jesus is getting at you can make $50,000 a year, but don't you make $100,000. I don't think that's what Jesus is really getting at. This whole passage is centered around the heart and the perspective that people have of their money. And what Jesus is really getting at is don't make your life about hoarding more than you could ever use. Don't make your life about hoarding stuff and about constantly reaching for more. Don't be someone who's greedy and always thinks that you need a little bit more. John Rockefeller, the richest man in the world at the time of his life, owned 80 or 90% of the oil and gas industry at the time. His net worth was 1% of the U.S. economy. And John D. Rockefeller was asked, how much money is enough? and he said just a little bit more. I think Jesus is talking about this kind of mindset, that if I just had more, I could be happy. If I could just work a little more extra, I could have more. And you never have this understanding that your life was about more than simply producing something here and now. You were made for more than this world. He's talking about you're choosing how you're going to live your life. You're going to live it for the things of this world or for the things of God. And if you live it for the things of God, it doesn't matter that you're going to automatically be poor, but it means your perspective shifts, and instead of being so consumed with making sure everything is 100% secure here, you make sure that your priority is the kingdom of God. And he says that's how God is calling you to live your life. You're called to pray differently. You're not called to just check off a list of how you pray or to pray. You're not called to just check off a list. I fasted. You're not called to just check off a list and say, I gave. You're not called to check off a list and say, I gave some money to the church. He says, everything in your life should be wrapped up in advancing the kingdom of God. And you can either choose to live your life like that, or you can choose to live it to advance your kingdom here and now. It's not about you can't make a living. It's about not having a love affair with your money. It's about not being greedy. It's about hoarding things and not being generous. It's about your money having you more than you having your money. That's what Jesus is really getting at here. And I'm going to prove this to you here in just a second. But Paul said to Timothy, the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. Solomon amassed incredible wealth, and when looking at it, he said, it's empty, it's vanity, it's of no value, because he understood that in the eternal realm, everything here is passing. And Jesus wants to make sure that people understood you can either live your life for now, or you can live it for eternity. He says that's the choice you got to make, and everybody in this room is making that choice. Now, here's the interesting thing. We're going to talk about it in a minute, but it's not that you're going to live in a third option. You're going to live one of these directions. Your life is going to be bent one of these directions. And I hope by the end of the sermon you understand which direction that is. But I want you to start off by understanding everybody has a choice to make. The second truth we find is in verse 21, and this is a powerful one. I want you to look at it with me. In verse 21, he says this. He says, for where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Now, this at this most base level, here's what he's saying. Where you put your treasure, that's where your heart, your inclinations, your desires, your emotions, your affections, that's all going to follow where you put your money. Now here's what that just has a double-edged sword. On one hand, what he's saying is, so what you can do is your money is kind of like a thermostat, but it's also like a thermometer. On one hand, your money's like a thermometer. It can tell you the temperature of your heart. You can tell what you're passionate about by looking at your bank account. You can tell what you're passionate about by looking at your budget. You can tell what you're passionate about by what you spend the most money on. You can tell what you're passionate about. It's a thermometer. It's there as a guide. It's just like a thermometer. A thermometer doesn't control the temperature. A thermometer just tells you the temperature. And he says money is like a thermometer here. It can tell you the condition of your heart. You're like, well, I don't like that. I don't either. Because when I look at my money, it tells me my passion is eating out in airplanes, right? Let's just be honest. Like, where do I put a lot of my money? Where do I put a lot of my finances? Where do I put a lot of my resources? Where do I put a lot of my time? He says, money is like a thermometer. It can help you gauge the condition of your heart. But here's the crazy thing. I want to tell you something else I believe this passage really teaches. I believe it also teaches the other side of this. Money can also be like a thermostat, and it can begin to drive where your passions are as well. And I'm going to explain what I mean by that in just a minute with a terrible illustration that I hate to admit is true. I'll tell you somebody told me this. It was me, okay? But somebody told me this, right? How many of y'all, I shouldn't ask this. Imagine there was someone that liked a sports bet. Imagine that someone liked to bet on sports. Anybody ever buy a lottery ticket in here? Anybody buy a lottery ticket? Anybody? Raise your hand. Raise your hand, right? Man, yeah. Some of y'all ain't telling the truth. But anyway, yeah, some sins of omission going on in the room. No, all joking aside, but here's what I'm going to tell you. I have been known to enjoy just seeing what I could possibly win with a little bit of cash, okay? I'm admitting something here, okay? But here's something I've learned, okay? And this is just for illustration purposes only. When you bet on a team, you become a fan of that team. You really do. And what I'm getting at is this. I know it's a terrible illustration, but you can bet on a team that you don't care a hill of beans about, and pretty soon you got their jersey and you're rooting in front of the TV. Why is that? Why is it that you can miss the lotto drawings every single night until the Powerball's up to 800 million and you buy your ticket? And all of a sudden, you got somewhere to be when that draw, you're going to be there. You're going to know what that drawing is. You want to see if you won. It happens, right? When you invest in something, you become more preoccupied about that something. On a much better note, Julie and I have had the opportunity in different areas of ministry. This is a much better illustration, right? There's a ministry called Water for Christ. And they drill water wells in Africa. And we've been able to financially give to them and support them at different times. Guess what ministry we always want to know what they're doing? We want to know what Water for Christ is doing. You see, not only does your money have the ability to tell you where your heart is, when you begin to invest in something, your heart begins to gravitate toward that which you put your money into. It's the weirdest thing. And if you don't believe that, I've had people say, well, Pastor, I want to use my resources for something. I don't know what to use them for. I'm going to tell you, find something you're passionate about. But if you can't, find something that is worthwhile and put your money into it, and you will become more passionate about the thing that you invest in. Jesus says, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. It will link up every single time. And so the question I got for you today is, first off, where is your heart currently based off your current financial picture? Where are you most passionate about if you were to look at your checking account? If I looked at your credit card statement, would I assume that you were most passionate about the kingdom of God? Or would I assume that you were passionate about something else? If you looked at mine, would you assume that I was most passionate about advancing the kingdom of God, or would you assume I was more passionate about advancing my own kingdom? That's what Jesus says. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. The heart and money will go hand in hand. And then he goes on down and says, where you focused affects everything else. It's kind of the second part of this. Look at verses 22 and 23. It looks like Jesus just switches gears in the middle of a conversation, but he's talking about the same thing. He says the eye is the lamp of the body. So he's using the eye as an illustration to reflect what he's trying to teach about the heart. He's trying to teach that the heart, you can tell a lot about the heart by looking at how you handle money. And vice versa, actually. And he says, so by illustrating that, he says the eye is the lamp of the body. So if your eye is healthy, your whole body is full of light. He said, so the eye is healthy, and you take in light. I don't know if you knew that's how you see, right? You take in light. That's how you're seeing. And it illuminates the world to you, so your whole body is now influenced by how healthy your eye is. Now follow me. He's saying the eye is the lamp of the body. The eye is what allows light in and lights up your world. And everything is influenced by that. He says, but if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light in you is darkness, how great is that darkness? If you have an unhealthy eye and you can't bring in the light and it's dark, there's no darkness like that kind of darkness. He's trying to make a parallel with the heart. If your heart is inclined in the wrong direction, then you can expect darkness in your life. But if your heart is inclined in the ways of righteousness, in the way of the light, your whole body will be full of light. So if you want to have a life filled with the light of Jesus, it's important that your heart be inclined into the ways of Jesus. And one of the ways you can incline your heart in the right direction is by taking the financial resources you've been given and invest them into the things of Jesus. You see, it's all connected here. It's about perspective. It's not about throwing money in an offering a plate. It's about having a heart that is hungry for the things of God. And when you have a heart that's inclined to the things of God, it's like an eye that's healthy that brings in light to the whole body. He says, where you focus, though, affects everything else. What you look at and how you look at it affects everything else. We said, how do you have someone go through the same situation and come out with totally different attitudes? It's because the perspective going in was vastly different. Job and his wife in the Old Testament. Do y'all remember Job? If you remember Job, if you don't remember, let me catch you up. Job and his wife, Job was a righteous man. He had kids, he had wealth, he had all sorts of animals, which was a sign of wealth in that day. That was the currency of the day, right? I mean, there was just animals, thousands upon thousands of sheep and goats and all these animals, camels. He had kids, he had houses. Job was wealthy. It says he was the mightiest man in the East. I mean, he was notable in his whole region. And Job had everything that he had taken away from him. But the thing we forget is that his wife had everything taken from her as well. And then we have the parallel of those two people who go through the same situation, but they have very different attitudes about it. Do you remember what Job said when he lost everything? And his wife said, just curse God and die. He says, shall we receive good from the hand of God and not evil? Job understood something about his stuff. He understood that everything that he lost was stuff that God had given him to begin with. It was ultimately the gift of God. So if God saw fit that it was time for that to come off of Job's life, then Job was going to trust God because God was a good God. You know, one of the ways that this works is when you're walking through life and you have a health crisis, right? It's not just in finances, it's in all of life. And you have a health crisis. You can look and you can sit and you can, woe is me, and I get it. I really do. Or you can look and say, wow, look what God has given me up to this point. I was reading a story, and this is a really hard term, but I was reading a story about a mother who lost a 9-year-old son. And she began to share the experience of losing her son and how heartbreaking it was and how hard it was. But she touches on what we're talking about. And as she began to talk about losing her son, she talks about the incredible blessing, though, of having him for those 9 years and how she would never trade those 9 years, even if it could erase the pain of losing him. Because she understands the blessing was the 9 years. It's perspective. It's having a heart inclined in the right direction. And where you focus will affect everything in your life. I'm going to tell you something. If you're just starting out in life, you're one of these, maybe our teenagers, you're one of our early college students. I want to tell you something to give you a little wisdom from an old guy to a younger one. Here it is. If you spend your life looking around at what everybody else has and comparing where you are, you're very likely going to be very miserable. That's why I think it's one of the healthiest things in the world for people to go on international mission trips, because you think you understand poverty until you realize that the slums of our nation look like rich neighborhoods compared to the slums of Lima, Peru. You drive there and there's 1 million people that live on a hillside, and you can see through every house because there's just nothing but window openings and mud floors and dirty kids playing. I'm going to tell you, it's a lot easier to count my blessings when I get perspective of how blessed I truly am. Guys, if you look around you and you're like, man, but so-and-so has that nice house, so-and-so has that nice car, great for them. And I'm not saying you don't work hard. I'm not saying you don't strive to put to use what God has given you to put to use. But if you get focused on where everybody else is instead of where God has brought you from, you will be miserable in your life. Where you focus affects everything else. Where you focus your heart will affect everything else. If you focus your heart and your attention to the things of this world, and then tragedy hits, and then you run back to God, what you realize is you're going to be so far behind of where you could have been because all your confidence has been built on things that can't save you. Think about Steve Jobs, right? I'm just chatting now. One of the wealthiest men in the world that would have given every dime he had for another day. Your perspective matters. When it comes to your finances, it matters what you are focused on. And if your hope is that if I can just make more, then my life will be good, you've never had a kid get really sick. If your hope is that if I could just have a nicer house, then I would be truly happy, you've never put a loved one in the ground. You realize that those things are nothing compared to the better things. Incline your heart to the better things. Make sure that you are focused on the better things, the eternal things that last, because where you focus affects everything else. And lastly, you can only have one master at a time. Look at verse 24. He says this. He says, I just keep losing my place today. He says, no one can serve two masters. Either he'll hate the one and love the other, he'll be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. Now, this is the one I really want you to hear, because these two ideas, he says, you have a choice to make, and there is no middle ground. You will either live your life for the things of God, or you will live your life for the things of the world. If you come to me and say, Pastor Chris, I really don't think that I'm living for the kingdom of God, then I don't have to ask where you're living for. Because he says, you cannot have two masters. Everybody in this room is mastered by someone or something. You're either mastered by God and the things of his kingdom, or you're mastered by the world. He says you can't serve both. There's no middle ground. You can't say, well, I'm gonna live Monday through Friday like I want to, and I'm gonna pursue money and ambition and personal gain, and then I'm gonna spend Sunday pursuing Jesus. I can tell you that's not how this works. You can't have two masters. It doesn't matter if you try to have two masters, you're still only going to have one. You're going to have one master. And it's either going to be God or it's going to be this world. He says you can't have them both. So you need to really come to terms with who is your master. It's like oil and water. It's like trying to have a great marriage and a great girlfriend on the side. It just can't happen. Right? I mean, right? I mean, some of you women are like, yeah. I mean, come on. Like I've seen people, man, my marriage is really getting in the way of my girlfriend's relationship. What? I've heard that. Well, I'll bet you that is getting in the way, right? You can only have one at a time. You're either all in or you're all out. It's like having to have great fitness, but also being the world's greatest Netflix binger. Right? I want to be in marathon shape, but I want to watch Netflix all day. They just don't go together, no matter how much we want it to. Something's mastering you. He says, and who's your master? That's really the question I want to leave you with today is why is that? Well, because God doesn't share this place with any other. God either sits on the throne of your heart or something else does, but it's not God and something, it's God or something. You need to understand that. You may not like it, but I want you to hear the truth. Either God is on the throne of your life or he's not. And you can try to dabble him in on Sundays, but it doesn't mean he's on the throne. And so I've got 4 questions as we kind of wrap it up and the musicians come up. Number 1 is, who's your master today? Is it your ambitions for this life, or you have ambitions for the life to come? Where's your focus? Are you constantly placing your attention on things that don't last, on other people, other situations, or are you focused on eternal things? I'll tell you something, a little funny illustration about this, and Pastor Leon and I both, I'll throw him under the bus. We're both like this. We love Facebook Marketplace. Love it. I didn't know he was behind me. I probably would have forgot he came up behind me. Anyway. But you know what I've noticed about Facebook Marketplace? The more that I look on Facebook Marketplace and want things, the less content I become with the things I already have. You ever notice that? It's true. The more I look on Marketplace, the less content I am with the things I have. Because when you focus on something, it lets that into your life. And you begin to covet. You begin to have unhealthy desires. So where's your focus? Some of you married, I'm going to tell you, let's just get off finances for a second. Some of you men in this room, some of you women in this room, you're focusing on everything that your spouse is not instead of praising God for what they are. Just a little rant, but I've heard this, the old 80-20 rule. Have you ever heard that? That your spouse will probably fulfill about 80% of what you wish, but there will be about 20% that they don't. And if you're not careful, you will spend your life looking for the 20% that they don't provide. Guys, 80% is pretty good. 80% is really good. But where is your focus? Where's your heart? What would your bank account say? If you really had to take an honest inventory, and we probably should all do this. I'm going to encourage you to do this. I'm going to do this. I'm committing to it. You can ask me next week if I did it. I'm not going to tell you the results, but I'm going to do it. I'm going to look at my bank account this week. And I'm going to look at every purchase I've made. And I'm going to ask myself, does this reflect the heart that God has for me? I'll do that. Would y'all commit to that? Would y'all actually commit to that? I'll commit to that. We're not going to like it. I'm not going to like it. But would you commit to doing that? And fourthly, what decision are you going to make? Which kingdom do you truly want to serve? Do you want to serve the kingdom of God or the kingdom of this world? I would imagine if you're in this room, you've already kind of bought into the idea that you want to serve in the kingdom of God. Then you have to begin to live in a life consistent with that choice. And you do this in one way by handling your finances with the right perspective. So I don't know what God's done in your life. I don't know what God's doing in your heart. But I know this, when I read a sermon with a passage like this, I know that I cannot be the only one convicted of my condition. And I want to challenge y'all. I want to encourage you to begin to cry out to the Lord, to be Lord over your pocketbook as well. Have you heard it said that the wallet is the last part of a person's life to be baptized? You ever heard that? And the idea is this. When we say Jesus, you're Lord of all, and we mean he's Lord of our family, he's Lord of my health, he's Lord of my hopes and dreams, but is he truly Lord of your wallet? See, that's the thing. You can't have two masters. And he's either what? Lord of all, or he's not Lord at all. Some of us need to surrender that. And it doesn't matter if you're wealthy or poor, we all have the same charge today. And I've met some wealthy people who are extremely generous and see themselves as just stewards of what God has given them. And I've seen some wealthy people who are stingy. And I've seen some poor people that are very generous and see everything they have, however meager that is, as what God has given them to steward. And I've seen poor people very stingy. It's not about that. It's not about the condition of your finances. It's about the condition of your heart. And that's what Christ is calling us out on today. Where is our heart? So we're going to pray, and then we're going to have a song of invitation. If God has just convicted you that you need to respond in some way, I encourage you to confess that, repent of that, tell someone about that, and begin to walk a different way. Let's pray. Father, thank you for this day. Thank you so much for all that you've given us, God. You've given us so much more than we could ever ask for or imagine. And God, it's so easy to get wrapped up in looking around us and thinking that someone else has it better off, and if we were just a little further along, that God, then we could be faithful. Then we could really be generous. Then we could be at peace. But God, we understand through these last few weeks that God, peace doesn't come from a pocketbook, God, it comes from the Spirit. And God, the life you've called us to live is to be a life surrendered completely to you. And God, I don't know what that looks like in every life in here, but God, you do. And I pray that God, if there's anyone in this room, that God, you're really not Lord of this area of their lives, that they would not walk out of here without surrendering this to you. Lord, I just pray that you would forgive us where we fall short of you. God, help us to walk with you, to live for you, to put up treasures in heaven. God, where they last. We praise you. We love you. In the name of Jesus we pray. Amen.